All right, let's dive right into this explainer. If you know Katherine Ryan's comedy, you know she's fiercely proud of her life in the UK, but she often jokes about her Canadian upbringing. Well, as we're going to see, digging into the historical records revealed this incredible story of survival, absolute tragedy, and a surprising full-circle migration that totally shifted her perspective on her own heritage.
Now, her motivation for going on this historical deep dive is just so incredibly relatable. She really wants to find some posh British roots to impress her very English teenage daughter, Violet. Violet, who literally speaks the Queen's English, is apparently the quote-unquote fancy one of the family, and she actually has a habit of apologizing for her mother's Canadian accent. So Catherine's mission is crystal clear. Truck down some noble English ancestry, maybe even a castle, and finally win some bragging rights at home.
Part 1. Preachers and Secret Letters. We kick things off on Catherine's maternal side in Canada, looking into the lineage of her beloved grandmother, Dorothy. Catherine knew her dad's side was entirely Irish, so the maternal line was really her best bet for finding those elusive English roots. And right out of the gate, at the University of Toronto's Rare Book Library, she strikes gold. Her 3 times great-grandfather, James Arminius Ritchie, was actually a published 19th century poet. Catherine lovingly compares him to an early rapper. But in a very relatable twist, the archives also held this rather peevish letter where James was begging his parents for money to fund an army commission. His dad, Catherine's 4 times great-grandfather, was Reverend Matthew Ritchie. He was a traveling Methodist saddleback preacher who, impressively, went on to become the very first principal of Victoria College. But wait, the archives also held a beautifully scandalous scrapbook entry, or cardophonia, from her 4 times great-grandmother, Louisa. Get this. The letter features these early 19th century asterisks, which Catherine jokingly suspects were used to bleep out a saucy secret or a curse word. Historians actually suggest Louisa was asking her husband to destroy a letter that perhaps compromised her modesty. It's just this brilliant little flash of the exact same comedy and personality that's running through Catherine's genes centuries later. But honestly, this was kind of a dead end for the noble English quest. Louisa was born in New York, and Matthew hailed from Ireland. Neither of them gave Catherine that English connection she desperately needed to impress Violet. So the search had to pivot entirely. Part 2. Tragedy in Newfoundland. The investigation takes us to the snowy, freezing, easternmost point of Canada, Bonavista, Newfoundland. And this is where the story completely shifts gears, from lighthearted historical quirks to a really profound tale of endurance. She learns that her 5 times great-grandparents, Giles Hosier and Grace Newell, were heavily involved in the local fishing industry back in the late 1700s. They owned what was called a fishing room. Now, that sounds small, but it wasn't just a room. It was a massive merchant premises used for landing and preparing cod. It was a crucial, grueling part of the harsh but booming local economy, and it relied entirely on the treacherous Atlantic Ocean. And that reliance brings us to a devastating historical record that literally wiped out the Hosier family. On October 7, 1812, their son William was lost at sea while transporting cargo. Because they had no insurance, the family business instantly collapsed. Less than a month later, on November 3rd, the father, Giles Hosier Sr., died, and the historical records actually note him as dying of a broken heart. Then just weeks later, on December 8th, a second son, Giles Jr., also passed away. The family lost 3 men and their entire livelihood in just 3 excruciating months. It's just an absolutely tragic end. He lost his son, lost his livelihood, and lost his own life. Standing right there at Giles' grave in Christ Church Anglican Church in Bonavista, Catherine is visibly moved by the sheer resilience of her ancestors. You know, she admitted she'd slagged off Canada in her stand-up routines in the past, but seeing this tragedy firsthand gave her a profound new respect for exactly how tough and industrious her Canadian relatives truly had to be. Part 3. The Corfe Castle Reveal. But here's the wild part. Tucked right inside that tragedy in Newfoundland was the golden ticket she'd been looking for. Giles Hosier's 1812 newspaper death notice contained one massive clue. It flat out stated that Giles was originally from Poole in the county of Dorset, England. He had only gone over to Newfoundland as an agent for a merchant. Boom. Her 5 times great-grandfather finally gives Catherine the exact English connection she's been hunting for. So, following those records all the way back across the Atlantic to England, specifically to her 8 times great-grandfather Nicholas Cobb, we get to the payoff. And the historical irony here is just amazing. Catherine was expecting nobility, right? Living in a grand English castle. Well, she gets her castle, but it's literally just the name of a village, Corfe Castle, down in Dorset. And rather than being some fancy nobleman in an estate, her ancestor actually ran a pub. An old indenture showed he sublet a tavern called the Ship. And crazy enough, that pub is still standing there today. It's just known as the Bank's Arms now. And you really cannot write this stuff. To make matters even more perfectly comedic for a stand-up comedian, records from 1701 show this ancestor, Nicholas Cobb, was a brewer out on bail. Why? Because he was accused of libel for speaking fraudulous and scurrilous words about the local magistrates. Honestly, it seems a talent for fearless, foul-mouthed commentary is literally a family tradition spanning over 3 centuries. It is such a wild, resilient, and totally diverse cast of characters that make up Katherine Ryan's family tree. Think about it. From early Canadian poets begging for cash, to saddlebag preachers, to those unbelievably hardy Newfoundland cod traders who endured unimaginable tragedy, all the way back to an outspoken English pub landlord. It's a rich historical tapestry that completely reframed her entire understanding of where she comes from. 230 years. That is how long her family spent surviving, working, and building a tough life out in Canada before Katherine finally crossed the ocean, moved to the UK, and essentially brought them all back home. It's this powerful realization that her deep roots in Canada are completely inextricably linked to the very English soil she calls home today. So we'll leave you with this thought. Katherine finally has the posh English heritage she was looking for to silence her daughter. She can proudly and truthfully say she has ancestors from Corfe Castle. But do you think she's ever actually going to admit to Violet that the castle was just a local tavern run by a foul-mouthed brewer? Knowing Katherine, she's probably going to keep that particular detail a scurrilous little secret.